Welcome back, everybody, at Mario Explore. Already our fourth episode. Today, we're going to talk about geoscience, the science behind exploration and exploitation of lithium, helium, oil and gas, any kind of those development need this knowledge to be able to succeed. And today we are lucky to have one of the greatest specialists and one of the field that I really use in my own company, Dr. Brad Hayes. Brad, welcome to our show.
Hello, a pleasure to be with you today.
Thanks for taking this invitation because I feel it's really important for people, and this is the goal of this podcast to understand what's behind what we see. If you extract lithium, if you extract helium, if you want to store CO2 in the ground, there's a lot of technology behind that, but there's also a lot of knowledge. And I know that your company, Petrel Robertson, is one of the leader in that, and I'm happy that you take the time to explain that to people. First question that I have for you, Brad, where do you come from and what brought you to geoscience like that?
I was born in Vancouver. I have lived in a few places across the country. I did my undergraduate education in geology at University of Toronto uh, back in the 1970s. I actually became interested in geology through a high school course in geology that was offered
Okay.
in the Toronto area. Got me going on that. When I uh, was working at or studying at the University of Toronto, I did a summer in the field with Noranda in Northern Ontario exploring for minerals. But then a representative from Shell Canada, oil and gas company, came interviewing at the university in my third year. I spent a summer in Calgary working with Shell and became hooked on working in the oil and gas industry in Western Canada. I moved on and did a PhD in geology at the University of Alberta, and then started working for Shell in the early 1980s and have moved forward from there in a variety of different companies. As you said, for the last 25 years or so, I've been working with Petrel, Robertson Consulting and seeing this very wide range of really interesting applications for geological knowledge.
Okay, so it's really interesting. So you've been in-house and owning also your own business. You saw both side of this field. Uh, that's interesting. How long did you stay with Shell?
I worked for Shell only for a few years, and I became aware of opportunities in other smaller companies in Calgary at the time in the 1980s. It was a very dynamic industry. There were literally hundreds of different oil and gas companies to work for. I joined a number of colleagues from Shell in moving to a company called Canadian Hunter Exploration, and I worked there for 6 years. They were very dynamic explorers for gas, particularly in northeastern British Columbia. So I spent quite a bit of my time working on developing new plays and prospects and assisting in drilling gas wells in northeastern British Columbia.
That's interesting because I can relate to that. I've been into Pink Mountain and Fort Nelson, Fort Liard, and all those places also. So let's go directly to the subject that we want to have today. Can you describe your company to me and Petrel Robertson, what you do and the different field? And after that, we may go in depth in every one of those branch that you have. But describe what's Petrel Robertson.
So Petrel Robertson is a company that has been around in various forms for about 50 years. We've started out as a geoscience company focusing on geophysical data, primarily for the oil and gas industry. We expanded and merged with a company called Robertson Research Canada back in the 1980s and became much more diverse in terms of performing some laboratory services and a much wider range of services in general in the geology field. Within since about 25 years ago when I joined the company, we focused much more on geoscience consulting, initially for the oil and gas industry. But over the last 15 years or so, much of our work has been continues to focus in the subsurface. But we work with companies that want to manage, for example, wastewater disposal in deep saline aquifers that are below groundwater and therefore don't pose any risk for drinking water supplies, for example. We've also looked a lot lately at exploration for helium. We've been involved with the startup of three different junior helium exploration companies in Western Canada. We're providing subsurface geological services for lithium exploration companies. I was just talking to a client this morning regarding exploration in a new area for lithium. And we're also very interested and working with the federal government on projects to assess the potential for carbon capture and storage in the subsurface.
That's interesting because and this is one of the point that I also try to make with people. The knowledge that we acquire in oil and gas industry is the perfect fit for the transition that is occurring right now. And what you just described here that your company is doing, this is exactly you are the future of the geology and the future also of the technology that will be able to fix the world problem. Uh, Brad, if we go point by point, let's say that we talk about lithium. How what kind of project, how do you get involved in that, and how do you develop a project in lithium?
The lithium exploration and development we're talking about in Western Canada is producing lithium from deep subsurface brines. So, from very salty waters that occur naturally, usually 1,500 meters or deeper in the subsurface. So, they're in reservoir rocks that we have typically looked for oil and gas in those rocks. Now, instead of focusing on the oil and gas component, we're focusing on the saline waters that are there. And in many parts of Western Canada, those saline waters contain lithium ions dissolved in the water as part of the salts. We're typically looking at concentrations that are still very low, on the order of 75 to 100 milligrams of lithium ion for every liter of water. So a very, very small concentration. And what we're trying to do when we work with lithium exploration companies is to locate areas or prospects where we can drill wells, get the maximum concentration of lithium, so it's the most economic to produce, and also assure the client that they're going to get a very, very rapid or high flow rate of saline water from their wells so that they actually get enough lithium through their plant to extract and in an economic fashion.
Yeah, I visit in South America, lithium plant, and down there they use the sun to evaporate the water. What kind of technology that your client use in Western Canada to strip the lithium from the brine?
Right. Well, we certainly don't have the amount of sunshine we would need or the heat to evaporate brines to create lithium as they do in South America. And even if we did, the environmental issues around doing that would be pretty profound. So, what our clients are looking at is methodology, and there's a variety of them, but they all go under the name of direct lithium extraction, or DLE. And so what they're doing is putting the lithium bearing brine through a facility where they can chemically strip the lithium ion out using adsorption technology, solvents, things like that, instead of just trying to simply evaporate the water to concentrate the brine. And that's really a very challenging aspect of the industry right now. There are some players in the lithium industry in Western Canada, and most notably a company called E3 Lithium. and they have done the geological work. They've licensed the areas they need. They've drilled some wells. They can get the fluids they want. Now what they are doing is running a pilot plant to test out this direct lithium extraction technology to see, can we do this on a commercial basis and make money in the long term.
That's good. So, and at the end, you re-inject the water in the formation, or
That's right. So that's another important aspect of locating the right place to do this project. Is not only the ability to take the lithium bearing water out and process it, but also to re-inject it at those very, those same very high rates, so that you don't end up with any wastewater at the surface.
do they put any valorization up on those projects in carbon sequestration? Because here in Quebec, I look at some project to sequester carbon in the saline aquifer like that. And is it something that they start to do?
It's still a point of that they're working on, I guess, in Western Canada, is that many of the formations that are prospective for lithium or for helium are also good targets for injecting carbon dioxide and storing it away safely. So we have to, or the regulator and the governments have to develop licensing schemes in different areas so that we don't get conflicts between different companies. As you can well imagine, it would not be a good idea to try to inject carbon dioxide very close to a place where you're taking out water at very high rates to produce lithium. So there's a bunch of regulatory thinking that's guided by geological evaluation to figure out who can do what in what area.
And how has our government right now manage themselves on that? Do they consult people like you? Is it progressing? Do we see something coming into because we know that the technology is evolving rapidly. The people like you can bring solution and work on stuff, but how the government is acting right now?
So the regulator and the government energy departments have to do a lot of ongoing work to keep current uh, with what companies are developing and discovering. And yes, they do consult organizations like ours sometime to help them out with understanding what, for example, what the separation between different projects must be in order to maintain safety and integrity of the projects. But they also have in all three major producing provinces in the West, in BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. Each of the regulators have their own technical staff that are becoming very conversant with these new industries. And in fact, just like Petrel Robertson, they used to spend most of their time looking at oil and gas. Now they spend most of their time trying to understand the relationships between lithium, helium, carbon capture and storage, and also oil and gas to try to keep things separated while maximizing the value of the resources that they can use.
Excellent. On the lithium part, which are the area right now that is the most promising?
In lithium, the target area that is very promising is exactly the same area that companies originally explored for oil and gas on the Alberta plains back in the 1940s, before the big initial discovery was made near Leduc, Alberta. So those same reservoirs that were very prolific oil and gas producers back in the 40s and 50s, and indeed still are in some places today, they're the same ones that also hold a lot of lithium-rich water. And so in fact, the E3 Lithium, the company that I mentioned before, has an arrangement, a commercial arrangement with Imperial Oil, which is the successor to the company that originally discovered oil in central Alberta, because Imperial still holds producing rights to a lot of those reservoirs. And so by working together, they can maximize the recovery of the remaining oil and gas, and at the same time use the knowledge that Imperial's built up over the years to assist E3 in designing their lithium extraction.
So I know a little bit the story behind oil and gas in the Western Canada. So I understand that the potential is enormous for that.
It is. I mean, when you do your geological work in the subsurface, what you realize very quickly is that oil and gas occur in very limited locations. Everything has to be right for an oil or gas accumulation to happen, and so much of the exploration for it includes a lot of mapping and understanding the reservoirs to find exactly the right spot, whereas most of those very nice porous permeable rock bodies that hold the oil and gas, they're actually full of saline water.
Yeah.
Through most of their geographic extent. So we've already done a lot of the subsurface work that's necessary for companies like E3 Lithium and other lithium explorers to understand where the best place might be to undertake their operations, but they still have to respect the existing oil and gas operations.
So just to recap a little bit for our audience, what is important to me right now, the lithium that you're talking about, it's diluted in salt water that you can pump out of the ground and remove from that. And the excess water is reinjected in the ground. Because a lot of people see like car batteries that they use lithium, but they don't they don't know what's lithium. They don't realize it's a salt, and so right now people will be able to see. Look, it's uh, we can have a well producing lithium in Western Canada.
Yeah, and we think that's really important because most of the lithium in the world today is produced in those salt flat areas in South America that you talked about before, and
Chile.
also by hard rock mining. I mean, there are lithium mines in Quebec and Manitoba and other traditional mining areas of Canada, but there's only so much supply we can get from those sources. And
Yeah,
if we want to build the number of car batteries and other batteries to support, say, electrical grids and things like that, we'll need a lot more lithium. And we really need this idea, this whole new area of lithium from saline brines to help us out to get to that supply that we need.
yeah, and there's another point that I would bring also. We also need the support and the comprehension of the government to be able to move on a regular pace on those development. It's really really important.
Yeah, the federal government regards lithium as a critical mineral because of its importance to the economy, in particularly in creating batteries. Yeah, it's something that is a very high priority.
You probably also work on hydrogen, native hydrogen, and can you develop a little bit uh, project that you might have work on in Canada or other place in the world? Because also we know that's an energy of the future, and people don't also know and realize that you can find hydrogen on the native in the ground like that, and you can produce it.
That's a really interesting area to talk about. I mean, right now, Alberta is actually a leading hydrogen producer, but they do that by stripping hydrogen out of natural gas. And then some of our existing carbon sequestration projects actually store away the CO2 associated with that process. So we create blue hydrogen. But the native hydrogen that you're referencing has been in the news lately. Some people call it white hydrogen, some people call it gold hydrogen, but it's definitely a different idea because you're looking at actually drilling a well to take hydrogen out of the earth so you don't have to do anything to manufacture the hydrogen,
Yeah.
which is something that's quite different than most of the hydrogen schemes we're talking about today, where we actually split the hydrogen out of water or out of natural gas.
Which is
It's
really expensive and energy intensive.
That's exactly right, which makes it a challenge. So the idea of being able to drill for hydrogen is really attractive. But it's a big challenge, and it's something that has not been established yet. There are a number of organizations in different parts of the world that are promoting the opportunity to drill in new areas and discover hydrogen deposits. And there have been a number of stories in the media about places that they think are highly prospective. But the fact of the matter is that we are not anywhere in the world producing native hydrogen in commercial quantities. There's one or two places where there are some hydrogen, you would call them seeps, or very low sort of natural rates of hydrogen production, and they're used as fuel in one or two places. But what we have not yet actually discovered are these commercially sized, large hydrogen deposits that we can just drill for. We're making interpretations to think that they might occur in some places, but the proof will be when someone actually drills some wells and produces that hydrogen at rates that end up being cheaper than it would be to manufacture your hydrogen from natural gas or from water.
Yeah, but with your experience and what you know about those kind of development, when first do you see that happening, or is it just a dream? And if you see it happening and we have a chance, when can we expect that?
I'm I am not really optimistic that native hydrogen is going to be something that will be significant. We've drilled millions of wells around the world already, and every time that we see an occurrence of gas in those wells, we normally sample it and do a gas analysis so we can figure out, well, there's so much natural gas, and that's how we found helium. To
Yeah,
date, is to look at those gas analyses and say, oh, there's a high concentration of helium. Let's look at developing that. But what we find is usually that hydrogen is in very, very low amounts, if present at all. And we're not seeing any leads right now that would help us understand where we might go to find these large quantities of nearly pure hydrogen. If we find hydrogen that's mixed with other gases like helium or natural gas or something like that, and it occurs in a low concentration, let's say 5% of the gas or something like that, then it would be pretty expensive to process that gas
yeah,
stream to get the hydrogen out. And again, if you can't do it uh, more economically than you can manufacture hydrogen, then it's really not an attractive
right.
venture.
It's not something that will attract investor to do. But
Right.
hydrogen in natural gas though can be used to reduce the carbon footprint. So
It can be, as long as if we create our hydrogen from natural gas, that we actually sequester or store underground the carbon dioxide that comes with the process.
exactly. You brought me to another really valuable gas, and just want to make a little story about helium. Helium, we had during the World War, United States developed large reserve of helium, which are now depleted. And we see the price of helium going really high. It's probably one of the most expensive gas right now that you can produce. And I know that I've been in contact with some of the company in Saskatchewan and other places in the world which are working on that. I know that at Petrel Robertson, you're working on that also. Can you develop a little bit about those projects and how what future you see with that?
Absolutely, it's a very interesting area, and governments in Western Canada, particularly in Saskatchewan, have real ambitions about being uh, world class helium producers in the not too distant future. There are probably on the order of, I would say, 15 or 20 junior exploration companies that are either producing helium right now in Western Canada, or they're looking for opportunities to discover enough of it to produce. So at Petrel, we've been working on this for about 10 years. We helped to co found a company called First Helium back in 2017, and we discovered a helium deposit in northwestern Alberta near the town of Peace River that First Helium is still working on to develop. Uh, we then have done a bunch of work for a company called Imperial Helium, and they actually, under with our guidance, discovered a new deposit of helium in southern Alberta, about halfway between Calgary and Medicine Hat, and near an old railway stop called Steveville. And that was a significant discovery of helium. The company Imperial Helium was purchased by another junior explorer called Royal Helium, and we've been working with them to help develop the Steveville discovery. It actually just came on stream 2 days ago, and it's now
Oh yeah,
producing.
it's recent.
It is very new. It's now producing helium. There's a company that works primarily in Saskatchewan. We haven't done any work for them at Petrel. They've got their own very strong staff. They now have 7 helium producing facilities scattered about southwestern Saskatchewan. And we know that there are a few other Canadian companies that have made discoveries in Saskatchewan, in southern Alberta, and one that's even just stepped across the border and is drilling in northern Montana, where they've discovered helium in the very same geology as just a little bit south of the border. So it's a very dynamic area right now. We've consulted to I think it's about 6 different helium exploration firms now, everywhere from people just sort of speculating and trying to get a position to companies like Royal that are active producers and explorers.
Yeah, this is pretty much exactly the same thing that I saw. And the people that you talk that are in Montana, those are the people that I get in contact to. I believe that's going to be a very big development also, and there's a good future for that, especially with this kind of gas, which is useful for medical field and different place. That I think that there's a good future. Are you also working on geothermia?
We've done a little bit of work on geothermal, in supporting new companies that have ideas that they want to pursue, and convince investors that it's really worthwhile to invest in their technology. So we did some work for a company called Ever Technologies 3 or 4 years ago, and they drilled a pilot geothermal project in west central Alberta near the town of Rocky Mountain House. And we did some work with geophysical data to help them locate the best place to put their wells. So they drilled those pilot wells, as I said, 3 or 4 years ago to demonstrate that their geothermal technology could work. Since then, based on the strength of that pilot project and other work they've done, they have moved to secure a lot more funding, hundreds of millions of dollars of funding, including
Wow.
some from our federal government. And they are currently working on developing a commercial geothermal project in Germany. Um,
In
there's a
Germany?
In Germany, yes. One thing with any resource industry, you have to undertake the work where the resource is of high quality. And in Germany, they found a spot where there's great demand. Everybody wants the electricity and the heat. The nature of the rocks underground is that they get hot relatively quickly as you drill deeper, and so it's a great spot to go. In Canada, we have a number of geothermal projects that people are working on in different areas, and we've consulted to a couple of other ones too. But in general, we don't have a lot of really hot places underground, like places where there's active volcanoes or other geological structures that bring heat up close to the surface. So it's more challenging in Canada in general to launch a geothermal project because we just don't have the resource
Oh, you have
that other countries
to
do.
drill too deep to get the heat.
Well, we actually looked at one project, for example, uh, that they're trying to develop in the Toronto area to drill deep enough to create heat from geothermal sources and then do district heating, or actually provide the warm air and the hot water for a new development area. And that's pretty exciting. But they were finding out as they start doing the work that, again, they would have to drill wells very, very deep to get enough heat. And the question's going to be, well, can they do that at a reasonable cost, and therefore use that geothermal energy?
Yeah, and we know now how much the price of drilling went up in the last couple of years. That's going to be more and more difficult for that. But that's interesting to see people from Canada developing in Europe like that, because I know different company coming from Norway and from Sweden, which are also in geothermal, and it's been developed for several years. I'm proud to have people from here going up there.
Well, it's the technology from the drilling side. We do a lot of very sophisticated drilling for various resources in the subsurface. So the Canadian technology there is, as you say, used in a bunch of different parts of the world.
Yeah. And I'm a firm believer also using the right technology at the right place and the right energy at the right place. It's always a winner this way. Brad, you also still work on oil and gas development around the world.
Yes, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, yes, we have we've worked in on just about every continent in more than 40 countries in on oil and gas projects. Some of them for Canadian companies that want to explore in other areas, and some of them for companies that are resident in a particular country that are looking for, again, Canadian type of expertise to help them out in uh, understanding what's going on in their subsurface.
As a specialist in this field, and the reason why I ask you this question, I won't ask you how to develop oil and gas, because we already covered it on other podcasts, and I don't want to repeat. But if you were 18-year-old right now who get interested in this field, and what kind of future do you see on a geoscience like that? Where people should go, and how should they orient themselves?
That's a really good question, and it's something that many of us in various resource industries are looking at right now, because we know that many young people uh, recently have not been attracted to resource industries for various concerns around, particularly around the environment. But we're also realizing, and as I think you're highlighting with your podcasts, that regardless of how we move ahead in terms of providing energy and resources, we do need to do uh, subsurface work, surface work. We need to do things that do impact the environment in order to produce the energy and the resources that we need. And many of those things do involve geoscience. So when I talk to students in geoscience programs or engineering programs in university, I stress to them the fact that what they learn, particularly around the subsurface and just geoscience principles in general, can be applied in many different areas. So you can use your knowledge in oil and gas and look at opportunities there, but you can use much of that same knowledge if you're interested in working in these other resources we've talked about, like helium, lithium, uh, carbon capture and storage, and geothermal. The same skill sets and many of the same technologies are used across all of those industries. So it's something that's of uh, great interest, and it's we see it as a really high priority to get to students when they're pretty young, to make them aware that these are very dynamic fields and that many of them are what we need to do in order to minimize environmental impacts that we're concerned about. And in
Yeah,
fact,
it's really
yeah.
important to explain that. What you just said, it's the core, because I feel like yours, you have both world. You can go into the field, but you also can go into the office. You can develop model. It's never a boring work. It's always challenging. It's always interesting. And in my point of view, the key of the future goes through geoscience because of carbon sequestration, like you just said, and those in-ground reservoir can be developed which don't impact the surface. So it's I wish that we could attract a lot of people to work in our field. What's the future for Petrel Robertson right now?
Well, that's a really interesting question because, a few years ago, when oil and gas industry, particularly in Canada, took a downturn, we were really wondering, is there going to be enough work ahead for us to stay busy? And we did say a lot of work to try and build new foundations, as I mentioned, starting up helium companies and things like that. And what we're finding today, and literally right now, is that many of these new areas are attracting investment and interest, and we're starting to become very busy again in primarily in these non-oil and gas projects. Although there is always oil and gas work to do because it's still very important to the Canadian economy and to the world energy picture to produce those substances uh, as efficiently and in environmentally least impact way as possible, which we do in Canada. So we're pretty excited about the future. People have asked me, when are you thinking of retiring? And I have to say to
Hopefully
them,
never.
it's yeah, well, yeah, exactly. It's getting too exciting right now.
Yeah.
There are just so many new things to do. But what I am doing is trying to uh, put more and more of my effort to reaching out. I do some teaching at universities and some guest lectures and things like that, and I try to make the case to to students that they really need to get into these exciting new areas. And we're currently working with one of our technical societies and some of the post secondary institutions in Alberta to even get in front of students at younger ages, perhaps in high school, to help them understand the potential for all of these different resource industries and get them thinking about it for their futures.
That's really, really interesting. Uh, what university are you attached to? UT.
So I'm an adjunct professor at University of Alberta in the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. So I sit on thesis committees. I do some guest lectures and projects with a number of the other professors there. I'm also a sessional instructor at Mount Royal University in Calgary, and I teach what's called petroleum geology right now, but we're working at the moment to change that curriculum or to evolve it into something that's more inclusive of the other resources that we're looking at. So I already include lectures in that course on helium and geothermal and subjects like that.
Yeah, they all go together.
Yeah.
For our viewer also, I'm a believer that during the transition of the energy, we're gonna need to develop more. And when I speak to people and when I go to Europe, Canada is a democratic country where we respect the environment. I believe this is the place where we should produce hydrocarbon, and the hydrocarbon that we produce here are cleaner and produce a better way than some other place in the world where they don't have those same concern than we have. And it's because of people like you, Brad, that we're able to do those development. Uh, People need to understand also, I think that one of the important points, we're not at peak oil yet. The decline is not going to happen right now, and we need to develop, but we need also to be able to control what we're emitting in the atmosphere, and the best way is to develop technology like we do here. And what's your point of view on when do you think peak oil and the decline will start?
Mario, you just have an enormous number of really interesting questions. That particular question is one that I address a lot. I've done some. One of my functions with the University of Alberta has been to develop a MOOC, or a massive open online course on the 21st century energy transition, and we talk about exactly these topics. Where do we get our energy from? What are the options, and how will those energy sources change in the future as we move forward? And what we know for sure is that today more than 80% of the energy that we use around the world is from fossil fuels, from oil, gas, and coal. And we know that that many would like to move to other sources, and indeed we're seeing more and more energy coming from wind and solar and geothermal and other alternative sources, many of which have lower carbon dioxide emissions than oil and gas do. But what we've got to realize is that there are many other environmental impacts as well. So when we talk about things like we discussed lithium earlier, uh, we want to have lithium to create batteries so that we can use electricity for more things and reduce our emissions that way. But producing lithium has some very profound environmental impacts that we're trying to minimize with our subsurface operations. But the lithium that is produced at surface in big evaporation ponds is very impactful to the local environment, as is mining lithium from open pit mines. The
Yeah.
great big open pit mine in Australia is one of the world's biggest lithium producers today. So we need a real diversity of energy sources going forward. There have been a lot of different predictions as to when oil and gas and coal production will peak. And there have been some coming out recently suggesting that we'll continue to use more and more oil and gas for another 4 or 5 years, and then it will plateau off and coal demand will drop sharply. And most of these demands are driven by models and by people thinking that, well, we'll be able to produce so much more energy from other sources that these demands will fall off. But the information, the data that we've got right now is that we use more oil and gas and coal than we ever have before, and those that consumption is still increasing every year. We really don't know when it will peak out. That the rate of acceleration is perhaps falling off as we replace some oil and gas applications. But I think we'll see oil and gas consumption continue to grow slowly, probably plateau off through the 2030s, um, and perhaps uh, reduce after that to some extent as world population growth slows and as more and more people around the world get the energy that they need. But we're going to be producing a lot of oil and gas and coal for decades to come, at the same time as we develop all these alternative energy sources that help to reduce emissions and meet some of the growth needs around the world.
This is where the importance, because the oil and gas has been demonized for 2 decades now, and people. I want the people, and this is one of the goal also of our podcast, to understand that the right energy at the right place, but we also can develop the solution for that with like you said earlier, carbon capture and sequestration could be one of the solution to offset the emission that we do with oil and gas. And I think this is why youngsters should get involved and you know a- be appealed to this those kind of job and career, to be able to make their mark on that. uh, Brad, if you had the if you were the Prime Minister of Canada, or President of United States right now, regarding energy and regarding your field, what would be the thing that you would change, that you would like to see change, or adapt, or what direction would you order?
I think the primary thing that I would do in that circumstance is to make energy security as the top priority. Because what we're seeing happen right now is that there are many different schemes and regulations and so on aimed at reducing emissions, and we're seeing in various parts of the world, particularly now in, let's say, Germany and the United Kingdom, that governments are stepping back from those emissions control schemes because they are threatening the security of energy supply for their citizens. There are a lot of people now in Germany and the United Kingdom that simply cannot afford to heat their homes or to have adequate electricity because the cost of that energy has become very, very high. So, and I think we're in danger of going that route in North America as well. I mean, we're very fortunate. We have so much diversity of energy sourcing in North America. You know, in Canada, more than 60% of our electricity, I'm not sure the exact number, but it's well over 60%, is currently from hydroelectricity, very low emissions electrical generation. But we still use a lot of of oil and gas for heating our homes and fueling our vehicles and things like that. And we can't change that really quickly. The answer is going to be in maintaining energy security for everyone, so affordable energy so people can live their lives, while at the same time trying to progress technology and attitudes and systems so that we can create all that energy with fewer and fewer environmental impacts. And so, as you
Yeah,
said, there's a variety of solutions. I mean, carbon capture and storage is one of them. Much more geothermal is another. Much more nuclear energy is essential if we want to reduce emissions.
if you want to be
And
able to do it.
yeah,
Uh, uh,
so
uh,
there's the answer is a whole bunch of things, but energy security has to be at the center.
that's really interesting because we never ever hear that. It's never in the narrative right now of the politician, and that should be at the forefront.
Yep.
Hopefully people will wake up because we have everything to make a good livelihood for people, and we don't need to make people suffer for nothing. What would you do as an individual person, or what can we do to make that happen, to bring this important question to the politician, and to make them understand that energy security is should be at the forefront.
That's a difficult thing, I think, to do as individuals. I think what our politicians need to do is to look overseas to see what the effects of emissions first policies that uh, don't pay sufficient attention to energy security are doing. As to say, I mentioned before, countries like Germany and the United Kingdom, where we see people actually suffering from a lack of energy security. And of course, we can look to many African and Asian nations where people have never had sufficient energy security to live a modern life. I think we can direct our politicians to perhaps look to those examples and realize that we could endanger the energy security of our own citizens if we don't keep it as a top priority. One thing that I think we can do as individuals, excuse me, that's important, is to change our own personal attitudes towards energy consumption. One thing that I show people when I lecture on the energy transition is I show them that I've got this really cool map that shows the top selling vehicle in every state of the United States. And I'm sure you're not surprised to learn that in, I think, about 45 or 46 of those states, the top selling vehicle is a large pickup truck.
Yeah,
And it consumes a lot of oil and gas. And I can tell you for sure that the top selling vehicles in Alberta and Saskatchewan are pickup trucks.
yeah.
Perhaps not so much. I don't know about other provinces, but we do need as individuals to think hard about the amount of energy that we consume, because it doesn't matter, regardless of how much energy we can actually create from oil and gas and nuclear and renewable sources. There's no way that we can create enough energy to have all 8 billion people in the world consume individually as much energy as we consume in Canada or the United States. So individuals have to think really hard about their own energy footprint, and everybody can play a role there.
That's funny that you brought that because there's been a study who came out in Quebec And for the last 20 years, that was a Honda Civic, the most sell vehicle. But the last couple of years now is a Ford 150,
Yeah.
even in Quebec.
Yeah, well, that's the leader in more than half of American states is the F-150. So,
Yeah.
um,
Uh,
eh,
as a question, also, since carbon tax, yes or no?
mhm. Well, carbon tax. One can easily understand the idea that taxing something more heavily will help people convince people to perhaps use alternatives. But for the individual, and again, we're looking for each individual to take action based on the carbon tax. It's it's quite difficult. I mean, in Alberta, for example, my home is heated with natural gas, and uh, in order to change that, it would require a very large investment in order to uh, produce more of my electricity from solar, say by putting solar panels on the roof of my house. Again, it's something that some people do, but economically, it's very difficult to make that attractive. Uh, Through a carbon tax, it might incent me to do that a little more quickly, but frankly, uh, the the amount of money I would need to spend to actually make a change in my own home, um, I'll just keep paying the carbon tax because I simply can't afford to put those new systems in for the very poor economic return they would give me.
So pretty much, this is the same lecture than we have here. The carbon tax drive the price up, but don't really change what people do.
Not when it's applied to individuals, I don't believe, and I think verging into the political a little bit and away from the technical. I mean, the recent reduction of carbon taxes on fuel oil in Canada, it makes no sense because the whole point of the carbon tax is to make the fuel more expensive so people will change. Well, if you're not going to if you're going to pull back on that, then you're really not doing what you said you were going to do, and you're admitting that it's not working.
So, yep. Uh, Brad, as a conclusion, is there any message that you would send or that you would like to give to people? That's your turn.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast, and I would really like to emphasize this last point that energy security is a primary goal, I think, for everyone. And to say if we keep going down the route that we're going in North America and Europe, where we focus on emissions and kind of forget about energy security, we may lose the security that we have before we realize that. And then it will be very expensive and it will be very environmentally impactful. In a negative way, if we have to scramble to restore energy security in short order. So, uh, that's a key message, and I would love the opportunity. I do a lot of guest lecturing remotely and in person, particularly at universities, but in communities across Canada. And I would love the opportunity to get in front of people to talk about this some more and to dig into the details of how we produce our energy and what we can do in different areas to do that most efficiently.
This concludes our fourth episode of our podcast at marioexplore.ca. Today we had Dr. Brad Hayes. Brad, thank you very much for being here. If you like what you saw today, please click like on the platform that you're listening to and follow us on what's coming. That's going to be interesting. Brad, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.